Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it on demand. We will be sending out an email after the webinar that includes a link that will take you directly to the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question for our panelists at any time during the presentation today, just go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel. You don't have to wait until the Q&A period. Submit your question, and then we will take about 10 or 15 minutes near the end of the presentation and go through those audience questions. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Software Quality as a Competitive Differentiator. Our speaker today is Maria Loughlin, Senior Vice President of Engineering at Veracode. Hi, Maria, how are you?
Hi, Charlene, I'm doing well. Thank you for the introduction.
Great, great. Well, I know you've got a great presentation, so I'm going to put myself on mute and let you get right to it. And but before I do, want to also let the audience know that we are going to have a polling question in a couple slides. So go ahead and just be ready for the polling question, and hope we can get as many people involved as possible. With that, I'm going to put myself on mute. Take it away.
Wonderful. Well, we have a great topic for our broadcast today. Software quality is near and dear to my heart as a software professional. So thank you for everybody who's joining live on the webinar or joining, listening to this as a recording. I'm going to jump right in and talk first about what we're planning to cover. Customers assume quality in everything that we buy today, not just software, but everything that we go to the store or buy online. So it's sometimes not clear how quality, putting extra effort in quality, can impact your business success. So I'm going to spend a few moments talking about the correlation between quality, customer satisfaction, and business success, because it is very real and very important for all of us to pay attention to that. Then I'm going to talk about DevOps. For those of us in the software industry, many of us are working with the methodology of DevOps, and there's a lot of promises within the DevOps culture around quality, but as implemented, there are often gaps. And so I want to take a look at how does quality play out, how should it play out, and how does it sometimes play out for teams that are using DevOps. And the last and maybe more substantial part of the talk, we'll focus on building a quality system. If there's one thing that you take away from the webinar today, I'd like it to be that quality isn't a one and done. It's not one little thing that you're going to tweak here or there. It's really focusing on a systemic view. Everybody is accountable for quality. There are many parts of the process. In fact, it's continuous through the process that you'll be focusing on this. So we'll talk a bit about how to build a quality system with that holistic view. This is the time for the poll. So what I'm interested to understand is who is the audience that we have today. Some of you will be professional testers, quality professionals, testing, QA engineer, maybe software engineers in test, maybe a quality architect. I'd like to know if you identify as a quality professional, or a developer, and I'll count the DevOps, operations engineer, release engineer in that bucket, or a product manager, UX designer, or an engineering manager, an executive that is in charge of running part of your business, or some other role. For quality, I assume that, or I know that a few roles are critical. And I have a point of view on that, which I'll share later in the talk. But before I share it, I would be interested to see what's the mix that we have on the webinar today, and I will talk to your roles and talk to how each of you contributes to the system of quality.
Okay, we'll give folks a few more seconds to go ahead and vote, make their selections. We have about 85% of folks who have voted already, so those are really great responses so far. So I will go ahead and close out the polling question now, and I'll let you get back, and then we'll come back to the results in a bit.
Okay, that works, Charlene. Thank you. So let's talk about quality and its impact on the business. Many of you may know the rating system Net Promoter Score. It's a question that can be posed to your customers. How likely would you recommend this product or service to a friend or colleague? It's a 10-point scale for the answer. Folks in the 9 to 10 response range are considered promoters. They are actually the folks that deliver profit to your business. They are your repeat customers. They're the ones who talk about the value that your product or service brings. So a great NPS has many of those promoters that are scoring 9 to 10. If your customer scores 7 or 8, we would label those as passive. They're neutral, although the numbers look positive. If they score 0 to 6, we would label that detractors. And industry research has shown that a 5-point difference in NPS score leads to a 1% revenue increase. And Bain and company have done extensive research on NPS and the correlation between quality, which is a primary driver of customer satisfaction with your product, and NPS. And what they find is that on average, an industry's Net Promoter Leader outgrew its competitors greater than 2 times. So this is a very concrete and very real correlation between your customer satisfaction, which derives from quality, and your business success. Quality also builds trust. If I think about Veracode and our business, it's all about trust. We run application security analysis on third-party software, maybe your software if you're listening to this webinar, and you have to trust implicitly that Veracode manages your results and your applications with the highest level of security. The converse is true. If a customer does not trust you or trust your product, then they're going to walk away from your system. 96% of customers exhibit disloyalty after a high-effort service experience, which would imply that they had a negative quality experience. So there's multiple ways that we can correlate quality with business success from the numbers. And then there are more back office, behind the scenes way that quality contributes. But these are very, very real for the success of your business as well. Productivity and predictability. The biggest driver against productivity is rework. And rework happens when issues are found late in the cycle. There are some quality or functionality gaps or problems that are showing up, and the team spends time outside of the cycle to resolve those. Puppet, we will talk about later, does an annual survey. It's a really extensive survey of software professionals. And they found that high-performing organizations spend over 20% less time on unplanned work than low-performing organizations. And a lot of that is attributed directly to building quality in first time around. One of the other side effects of quality is employee happiness. Puppet also measured employee NPS, which is the employee answer to would they recommend their company to a friend for them to join the company. And the employees that worked in high-performing organizations where quality was part of the ecosystem were more than twice as likely to recommend their company to their employees. So quality has the direct and measurable bottom line revenue benefits. It also has these perhaps less easy to quantify, but very real productivity, predictability, and employee retention benefits. I'll take a moment right now before we get back to the poll to talk about who I am. Thank all of you for joining, and we'll have a look at your poll results in a moment. I'm VP of Engineering at Veracode. I've been here for 6 years, and I come from 2 decades of software engineering leadership. I have seen it all in terms of process and in terms of management of quality, from waterfall to agile to DevOps, from developing in monoliths to developing in microservices. And this is a subject that I am passionate about. At this moment, I'm managing the FedRAMP instance of Veracode's application security products. And I have deep expertise, not just in software development lifecycle in general, but the secure software development lifecycle and DevSecOps. So let's see how the poll results came back.
Okay, here are the results of the poll. Looks like the majority of folks here are other, the ubiquitous other, but a lot of developers, DevOps operation engineers. So I think you're going to have a really good audience for today's presentation.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I welcome the others to enter in the chat what your other role would identify as. And I'll make a comment on the other non-others. The quality professionals, 23%, developers, DevOps, and engineering leadership. Thank you all for joining. I had mentioned that I consider there are 3 roles that are uniquely important to the success of your quality system. One of those is management, executive leadership, who set a tone and who really align the organization around the priority of quality. So there are 15% of those who enter this particular poll in that bucket. The other is product management, who really have to value quality. Product managers are writing the requirements for the software teams, development and quality teams. It is critically important to have a strategic view in your product management team, a strategic view that values the long-term benefit of quality, short-term and long-term benefit quality over the immediate feature delivery, which is tempting at times to rush through. And I absolutely welcome all the quality professionals and all the developers. You are the folks who make it happen in your organizations, who implement quality. And I look forward to getting your feedback in the questions and comments if there are items that you want to respond to in this webinar.
Okay, I'll go ahead and hide the results.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start talking about DevOps. DevOps promises a lot. It's really a mindset where there's a continuous investment all the way from planning to developing to integrating, releasing, continuous feedback through the deployment process. And in this mindset, everybody is responsible for quality. I actually liked this particular rendering of the DevOps loop because it shows continuous testing all the way through the cycle. And what this implies is that quality decisions are made all around that cycle at speed by the team members who have the most context in the area that they're working in. DevOps also promises comprehensive testing. And so there's an automate everything mindset, all the way from the unit test at the bottom of the stack to the UI end-to-end test at the top of the stack. The premise of DevOps is that everything should be automated and repeatable. DevOps often goes hand in hand with development in a microservices architecture, and microservices also enable a modular approach to unit testing, very quick delivery from your starting point to testable value. And so all of this orientation towards testable units and automation throughout the stack is part of the DevOps ecosystem. Similarly, DevOps promotes automation throughout the lifecycle. The words shift left, pushing your testing, pushing your security testing is an example, all the way to the left at the design and test phases, as well as shifting right so that you're doing all of those activities in production, is part of the DevOps mantra, part of what we're trying to get at to get the maximum benefit from this methodology. And so I'm interested to ask all of you on the call and the recording, is this your experience? I can say for myself that it is not consistently my experience. The trip does not always match the brochure, as we sometimes say. Quality investment is often driven by the delivery team. It's independent of an overall strategy. So that continuous loop of testing and of quality focus may be disrupted if there are parts of the team that are more or less quality minded. And the diagram on the left is not really a scientific diagram, but it's showing that you end up with all sorts of tasks with almost equal priorities, and it really depends on the structure of the team versus an overall strategy. And this is if DevOps is not implemented in a thoughtful way. So I'll show a few survey results. GitLab 2018 Global Developer Report. GitLab polled 5,000, actually more than 5,000 software professionals at the end of 2017, and found that 42%, and maybe we'll add the 18%, sometimes sacrifice quality to meet a deadline. That certainly is at odds with the DevOps mantra that quality is built in, and so it shouldn't be sacrificed to meet a deadline if all of the automation is in place. A similar finding in this chart from the GitLab report, which is that testing is causing delays. And again, if it were continuous and really working well end-to-end on the cycle, this would not be as prominent an experience of the development teams. Moving on to the Puppet report, Puppet and Splunk have done a survey of IT professionals for over 7 years, 30,000 technical professionals in total. And what they do is they cluster their responses into high, medium, and low performing teams. So this chart on the left shows the change failure rate for high performers and low performers. The change failure rate is between 0 and 15% as reported by the high performers. It's 31 to 45% as reported to the low performers. So again, the low performers from a DevOps perspective, implying from a quality perspective, have 5 times more changes that fail when they push them to production. Significant impact to the experience of your customers. And another chart from the Puppet report, the mean time to repair is reported as less than an hour from the high performing teams, between 1 day and 1 week for the low performing teams. So you can extrapolate that as 96 times faster for the high performing teams. Veracode also has an annual report, State of Software Security, and we are the largest study of application security risk. The study that we're looking at here is the 2017 4,000 scans over a 12-month period, crossing 7 different industry verticals. So we're able to look at the findings that we see in the applications that Veracode scans. And what we see is that 85% of applications are vulnerable on their first scan with this, and 36% have high or very high vulnerabilities. The 36% number alarms me. These include cross-site scripting, SQL injections, the things that are known and just ready to cause web breaches in your web applications. Or they could be in a static analysis, credential mismanagement. And again, these are showing some failures in the quality process, and in this case, in particular, the security quality process. One last chart is that the number of applications, the percentage passing the OWASP top 10 policy on first scan is consistent over time. It's consistently about 30% of applications that pass, 70% that fail. And we clearly need to make some changes to our quality systems, and in this case, our security focus within quality, to change the need, to move the needle here. So DevOps promises quality, and there's a lot of infrastructure and mindset around quality, but there clearly are challenges for teams that are delivering this based on the data. We'll quickly talk about what are those challenges, because these are the things that all of us want to resolve in our systems. One challenge is the quality process is reinvented. One is that quality efforts are often unfocused. There's relentless pressure to deliver results, and the complexity of software is greater than it was before. So on this slide, the area in the blue circles is who is responsible for quality in waterfall, agile, and DevOps processes. So we can see that the ownership of quality is moving from the testing team to the Scrum team to the extended DevOps team. And my theory is that many organizations move to DevOps, but really don't enable or support or train everybody in that larger team on the quality mindset and how to implement for quality. Quality efforts are often unfocused, and part of the problem here is that there is so many things that one could focus on and work on for quality that it can be subjective and that you may get teams implementing well in pockets, but not implementing well overall as a strategy. Speed rules. As we know, there's a lot of pressure to deliver features. It's a fallacy, but it really is too easy to shortchange quality. This is where all of you that responded to the poll as developers, quality engineers, product managers, even engineering managers, it's important to stand up. It takes a strong leader or engineer to prioritize quality, even when you're feeling like this egg that's about to crack. And software is increasingly complex, so the quality attributes by definition are more complex. If you think about a distributed Internet of Things system, there's on the device some hardware and software, there's a communication system, there's server side, the scale of the number of devices, the scale of communication is bigger than before. And from a security perspective, the environment has new threats. We're going to be deploying to untrusted environments. So this really is a complex world that we're deploying our software into. Bottom line for this segment of the talk, there are challenges in many parts of the DevOps system, and I think it shows. Deming has many great quotes around quality. This one I particularly liked. Your system is perfectly designed to give you the results you're getting. And so when we think about improving the quality of our systems and also improving the security quality of our systems, we really have to think about what are all the pieces of our system, and in this case, we'll talk about the DevOps system, that need to change. Okay, I'll talk now about creating the quality system. Like I said, this really is a system, and I recommend thinking about it with different phases. First of all, think about your strategy, which is really the goals. What are your quality goals? How are you going to empower your team to accomplish those? And then with strategy, moving on to process, how are you going to implement that? And then test automation. All of your decisions around strategy and process and automation need to be driven across your organization. And here is where you want to invest in automation, invest heavily upfront, invest throughout the life cycle. With a recommended set of tools, it's very easy for the efforts to become unfocused and distributed with many, many different tools being introduced. And so I really recommend that when you're driving this in your organization, you have an architect that's talking about, okay, here's the guidance, here's some recommended tools that will work in our environment. So let's talk about that strategy first step. First thing to think about is, what are your quality goals? And these could be functional or user experience or consistency or reliability, performance, maintainable, scalable, secure. There are so many elements of quality that can be considered. And there are nuances for different types of software. For example, at Veracode, our customers care most of all about the accuracy of the security findings that we deliver, as well as the consistency of the findings scan over scan. I use an iRobot machine to clean my home. I don't care as much about consistency there. I care that well, I do care about consistency. I care that the robot doesn't get lost, doesn't stop, doesn't fall down the stairs. And so there, what I care about from a quality perspective is quite different. I'm a pragmatist. I love this definition on the left. Is your customer getting the value that they expect from your product? Can they accomplish the tasks that they bought your software for? And it may be all or a subset or a prioritized subset of the items in the box there. I always advocate engaging multiple stakeholders as you define your quality goals, because I think that the engineering, quality professionals, product managers will also should have a strong voice in the quality goals, particularly around, is the system maintainable? Can we maintain the productivity velocity that we have, that we are expecting in the long haul for this product? And is the product scalable and is it secure? In the strategy period, you'll also think about where you're going to do your testing, when you're going to do your testing. Is it continuous as you run your builds? What do you test in pre-production? What do you test in production? And there are many, many options here. thinking about them and strategizing so that your investments are focused is the point. You'd also consider who. And I believe that the maturity of your organization defines who's going to implement all of these tests. Ultimately, the delivery team owns all of the tests. The lower levels, unit, maybe unit component integration, but for sure unit tests are owned by developers. A mature organization will have all of the layers of the stack with the test automation owned by development. Other organizations, and this is totally fine, will have quality professionals do some manual testing or be responsible for maybe the end-to-end test or maybe the UI tests. And I think that there is no one size fits all. It does depend on the maturity of your organization, the staff that you have, and the maturity of the products that you're shipping. The most important thing is that the quality mindset is always present. It's great to have a QA architect with the same gravity of voice and with the same level of impact as a system architect. And we want that person to have the voice of the customer present to really guide the organization and make sure that they're evangelizing the continuous investment. So we have our strategy. We know how we're going to define quality for our product. Now we'll move into process. We should expect that the investment in quality changes based on the phase that you're building in your software. If you're just starting out, you're going to be spending a lot of time. The investment is very high on your deployment automation, on your unit test framework, as well as the initial unit tests, on your test infrastructure so that your builds can run those tests. If you have an MVP, you're in the walk of this picture right here. Now you're building the upper layers of your test pyramids. You're building dashboards. You're involving other aspects of testing, for example, performance testing or security testing. And if you're at the run where you're in production, you now have software deployed, and hopefully you're updating that software on a continuous basis. Well, now you're really running quality where you're investing in inspecting and adapting to the continuous feedback that you're getting from production. I always recommend looking at customer data, looking at support data, looking at the logs and the anomalies of the logs from production and feeding that back into the quality process. So expect and resource appropriately that your investment in quality will change over time as your product matures. For consistent quality, you need consistent adherence to a definition of done. And this should be attached to all of the stories, epics that are going through your build system. This page shows a screenshot. It is a little old, dated at this point, but it was one of the Veracode teams some time ago brainstorming on what is the definition of done for their part of the product. And it'll include things like unit tests, user experience review, security review, code reviews have been completed. What I think is important is that the definition of done is formal, that it's documented, that it's published, and ideally multiple Scrum teams, maybe all of your teams, work to the same definition of done. And that there's a ritual and it's recorded when a team chooses not to follow the definition of done. This should be something that is allowed. There may, of course, be reasons that you're going to do things differently for one set of stories, but it should not be taken lightly. And if that ritual is there, you will get a consistency in delivery that you did not have before. There also is value to a definition of ready, where developers can ask that the requirements are complete and that the acceptance criteria are well understood before they start on a story. That also will improve quality because it will ensure that the teams are more likely building exactly what the customer wants. So again, this is an example of putting formality into your process, which has a big payback in the quality that you deliver. In the DevOps world, but really in any world, we want to gather metrics. Inspect what you expect. The teams will absolutely change behavior based on the metrics that you're gathering. And so you want to make sure that the metrics are good metrics to match the quality goals that you have. Some of the very common ones are escape defects, mean time to repair, service interruptions if you've got a SaaS platform and you want no or minimal downtime. An internal view of your quality will be covered with the test coverage, issues that are opened and then fixed and then reopened. I think all of these metrics are wonderful. What I think is important is that you measure them and that you make them visible and transparent. One could argue that any particular metric is flawed, and that may be true. That still is not a reason to not follow these, because the visibility and transparency and the executive buy-in that these metrics are important and the team buy-in that these metrics are important will lead to higher quality. So we've done 2 steps that I outlined in creating a quality process. We've thought about our strategy, which is the what, how do we define the quality? We've talked about our process, the how. Now we get into automating everything. And when I say everything, we automate the infrastructure and we automate the tests. So the ideal is that we automate all of the pieces that contribute to our quality. I took this slide from the Atlassian, this picture from the Atlassian marketplace for DevOps apps, and it's a little overwhelming. Here are just one vendor's point of view of the options available for automation in your system. Again, a quality architect, or at least a senior team that takes the time to think about tools and think about what's important for your environment, is critically important early, such that you make good investments and empower your teams to build the automation that you need. So in terms of automation infrastructure, you're going to choose how to automate your CI/CD pipeline. You care that it's reliable, repeatable. Jenkins is one example of a great CI/CD pipeline tool. You're going to automate your test environments. You want your development team to be able to easily create test environments, easily scale those up when they have different types of testing that they need to perform. One caution that I'll add here is that you monitor these test environments for cost, because it's easy to to spin them up. It's also important to make sure that teams are using them appropriately. You want to invest in automation for your test frameworks. These can be integrated with your build pipeline or not. You want to invest in your framework for quality metrics. We talked about some of these. And then you want to think about your test stack. So from the bottom up, unit tests, component tests, integration, end-to-end UI testing. Some of these, like the unit tests, the UI tests, you're going to match your language of choice. So JUnit, PyUnit are examples of unit test frameworks. Some of these, you're going to do end-to-end testing, maybe in a UI-oriented tool, Selenium or Protractor, and you're going to include performance testing at the component layer and at the end-to-end layer. Some of these can be difficult, and so as you strategize, you will identify what coverage level you expect and what investment you expect for all of these layers over the duration of your project. So we talked about strategy, process, and automation of your test infrastructure. I'm now going to switch to driving quality across the organization, because having all of the goals and process in the world is not enough. You have to get buy-in from your teams. So we'll talk about breaking the silos. You want autonomous teams that can own quality and feel accountable for it. The goals that these teams have need to support the quality goals that you outlined. You need to invest in your people. Sometimes that means training. Sometimes that means budget for infrastructure and guidance on how to implement the process that you have in mind, or that they have in mind. And possibly most important of all, you have to have a learning culture. So one example of supporting the team is to set up ways for birds of a feather to talk to each other, identify best practices, identify tools that can be reused in different parts of your organization, encourage and reward participation in quality guilds or automation or maybe UI. And this will really build that overall culture of quality in your organization. For continuous learning, what you want is an ecosystem of measuring, reflecting, and learning. It's got to be okay to make mistakes. And an organization that tries to hide their mistakes will have low quality. An organization where the data is transparent, the learning about that data is transparent and continuous, will raise to much higher levels of quality than a non-continuous learning organization. So I've talked a lot about quality in general. I'm going to have a few slides around security quality. What do you need to do? Is it the same? Is it different when you're thinking about the security of your applications? I'll say the orientation that you have when setting this up, it's really the same. You think about strategy, you think about process, and you think about automation. For strategy, it comes down to a security policy. The policy is going to define your tolerance for risk and specify what you expect in your organization for remediation of vulnerable code and vulnerable components. You're going to define the standards for license unit usage, the standards and recommended libraries for your embedded components and the third-party software that you use. So again, you start with strategy and define what is it that is important and what level is important for your applications. A tool that I've seen used very successfully, in this case, I give an example of security, but it can be used for DevOps or quality or different initiatives that you're working on, is a maturity model. Here, teams look at the different types of activities that are part of the process that you're trying to drive and rate themselves from beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert in terms of their maturity along that axis. I give one example here of what that might look like for a secure design activity within an overall security maturity matrix. So teams will rate themselves, where are they within all of the rows of a matrix like this, and then set goals for themselves. What happens here is that the team themselves are setting their goals. The teams themselves are measuring and understanding what it takes to get from, as they move right on this matrix. Very motivating, very empowering, and I have seen great success using a maturity model approach like this for quality as well as for security quality. And for automation, again, the story for security is just like the story for quality as a whole. What Veracode likes to say, the best application security is invisible. Testing is integrated. Right in your pipelines, you can automate your static analysis, your dynamic analysis after you've deployed to test in production, your software composition analysis right in your pipeline, even in your IDE. What you also want is that security bugs are managed just like any other bug in the system. They should go through the same bug tracking system, the same process of remediation as the rest and triage as the rest of your bugs. Make it invisible. That way the quality that you expect and that is defined in your policy will be easy for your developers to absorb as they go through their daily work. So if I recap, we talked about quality and business success. We talked about DevOps, what it promises, where the gaps sometimes are. We talked about building a quality system. And I found this quote from William Foster. He was a US Marine. He received a Medal of Honor in World War II, Battle of Okinawa. And I loved the quote. Quality is never an accident. It's the result of high intention, sincere effort, skillful execution, which really reflects this mindset of strategy, process, and execution that we talked about. Again, if there is one thing that you take away from this webinar, I want you to think about quality as a system. You're going to get the quality outcome in your products that your system that you have built in terms of your strategy, your process, and your automation infrastructure is able to support. I'd like to pause at this point. Would love to hear some questions from the audience.
Yeah, okay, great. We have about 20 minutes to the top of the hour, so plenty of time for questions, folks. If you have not submitted a question and you have one, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will get to as many questions as we can during the event. Also, please note that if we do not get to your question, Maria will get a copy of all of the questions that come through, so I'm sure she'll be more than happy to answer any questions offline afterwards. So the first question is, in addition to NPS, are there other metrics of the end user's experience that correlate well to product quality?
Yes, there are, and I'm happy to share my perspective on those. There are many systems, certainly in my company Veracode, in your company I'm sure, that track feedback from your customers. One of those is support. Customers may open support cases, have questions, have challenges with the product. The frequency of support cases, the clustering of support cases in particular pieces of the product is a really strong indicator of the quality of that piece of product, and related things, like maybe it's the quality of the documentation or the quality of the user interface to that piece of functionality. One thing that is a sign of a mature organization is that the support and customer-facing services organization has the same vocabulary as the engineering organization. Usually this means engineering following the support and customer-facing side about support cases and how we classify support cases, how we recognize and use the same sort of analysis for what's going well and what's going poorly from a customer perspective. Veracode, as an example, after a support case, there's a quick survey, so it's not an NPS survey, it's a quick survey to customers, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 questions. How was your experience? Do you have any additional feedback? There's a wealth of information here around what caused the support case to be added, and also what was their experience as the Veracode team tried to interact with the customer. So all of this data that comes in through the support system is helpful.
Okay, great. Next question. What strategies have you used to break down silos and work with people to start incorporating unit tests into code? Seems everyone has done coding in one way or in one way for all these years.
Interesting, yes. Definition of done has been successful at Veracode. We have a definition of done for newer code microservices where we have a high bar, it's over 90% of code coverage by unit tests. Once the goal is there, and once the team trusts that the organization will support them and give them time and give them the resources they need to implement, they will reach that level of unit test coverage. So really, I would say it's about alignment and it's about visibility and transparency. Typically, I've found that the engineering teams meet the goals when they are setting the goals themselves and have the support to enable that.
All right, great. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have a question for Maria, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel. We have plenty of time for questions, so go ahead and get it in. Next question, I have a hybrid SaaS application, which includes microservices and a 3-tier monolith. How should I set quality goals across the teams?
That is a tricky question. I'm intimately familiar with that scenario because I think that Veracode and many other customers, even customers of Veracode, many other software vendors are in that same situation. What we have chosen to do is to set goals that are appropriate for the piece of software and the maturity of the software as it's being developed. So for microservices, for example, we have a very high bar on code coverage for unit tests. We also have a very high bar on integration testing and mocking of the microservices so that we can quickly and early in the life cycle make sure that the interfaces between microservices are well defined and the interfaces are working as expected. For the 3-tier part of a product, it's often the case that these are less new, less modern pieces of software, and they may have accrued more technical debt than the microservices piece of software. And so I think it's quite appropriate and necessary at times to define security goals for the 3-tier monolith that are maybe different than those standards that you'll set for the newer microservices development, which is more ideally suited to the DevOps, automate everything approach. So for the 3-tier, again, you'll think about what is most important. Is it high performance or user experience and or functionality, maintainability? And so for the items that you choose to prioritize for quality, I would recommend that the definition of done has a quantifiable way to make sure that these pieces are getting the attention that they need. But to come back to the point, I think it's necessary and appropriate in some cases to have different quality goals, different levels of rigor in different pieces of your application.
Okay, all right, great. Next question here. What metrics do you recommend for security quality?
For security quality, we want to make sure that risk is being reduced. So the metrics that I talk about, it's fine to measure counts, but it's really trends that I recommend that teams focus on. So let's say you do a static analysis, dynamic analysis, software composition analysis of your software, and you have a baseline. That's step one, is establish the baseline of where is your team, your software right now. I think that the most successful security programs set program goals, and so the program goals will relate to their security policy. And the program goals may be remediate all high severity and high issues, security issues within a 3-month time period or a 2-week time period or whatever is appropriate. And so the goals that I would recommend you track are, after getting a baseline, are you reaching the targets that are being set by your company? Then there's the security quality you're building in, where I discussed the quality when you have a piece of software, you run some analysis, and now you're remediating those issues. You really want to make sure that the trend of remediation matches your expectations. But for new software that you're writing, the expectation would be that you run a security analysis on the software almost continuously. Certainly every time you build, you can run a static analysis. Certainly every time you deploy to test, and before deploying to production, you can run a dynamic analysis. At Veracode, we have tags we use Jira for our issue and story management system. We have tags and we automatically import bugs into that system as they're found in new code developed by our teams. Some of the tags will be release blockers. If this is a level of a security issue that we will not release the code until it's resolved. Some of them will be marked as security issues with a remediation timeline that's well defined. So again, the metrics that work well in this case is simple bug reporting metrics that come from your bug tracking system, which is Jira in our case. What are the distribution of security issues in the system? What's the trend over time for new development? One of the things, there have been a few things, but one of the things we found very successful is making sure that our teams are being trained, doing security e-learning, and we see that there is a correlation between teams that are learning about security as they go and the bugs that they're introducing. So that is another interesting metric, which is for the teams that are able to get security feedback right in their IDE. Are they producing fewer software with fewer bugs than the other teams? So again, some of it comes down to basic bug tracking for these security issues and watching for clusters of issues or good trending of remediation of those issues.
All right, great. We have gotten some great questions in so far, but there's plenty of time. If you have a question for Maria, go ahead and submit it, and we'll just keep plugging along here. Next question: what additional challenges and/or opportunities exist for software product quality in government-regulated industries?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So for opportunity, and I think it applies to government industry, but it applies to every industry. The biggest opportunity that I see, the lowest hanging fruit, is related to software composition. We now compose our applications from source, open source, or third-party components as much, if not more, as we write from scratch. Maintaining currency in those software components is a way to maintain security, because vulnerabilities are found, there are zero-day vulnerabilities found all the time in these embedded components that we're using. And it is certainly an area which is a blind spot for many organizations and an area where there is low-hanging fruit for those who want to improve their security, to put together a program around the components that you're using in your software. That does relate to government software. It relates to all software.
All right. Okay, next question. Let's see. How can stakeholders outside engineering have a supportive voice to improve quality?
Oh, I love this question. Maybe this was one of the other of that earlier.
Yeah, maybe.
Call. Yes. So a supportive voice is a wonderful part of this question, because where I'm going to go with this is talking about the culture of learning. And if the external stakeholders, who of course care deeply about quality, share in that culture of learning and want to be part of that culture in learning, then I think that all parties, the development engineers, managers, QA engineers, will be very open to being transparent with the information that they have, and to sharing that without reservation. And then I think that the dialogue between support, solution architects, service personnel, and the engineering organization is deeper and richer and more supportive. At Veracode, we have a fantastic customer services organization, and they share their perspective all the time. We have many recurring reports from Salesforce on our support cases, as well as win-loss reports from our solution architects with engineering. And in the same spirit of transparency, engineering has dashboards that show where we are with our release cadence and with our quality metrics. I think that the dialogue is very, very valuable, and making sure that the dialogue is presented and followed through in a no blame. This is continuous learning. This is for all of us to share in the success and work together on the learnings. It's a great question, and I applaud the organization that's thinking this way.
All right, great. So we have one more question, but there's, as I said before, if you have a question for Maria, there's still time. So go ahead and get it on it. The next question: what are best practices for making quality metrics transparent? My team measures bug rates, but they are concerned the data will be used punitively.
Interesting how this question relates to the last one.
Exactly.
It does. And it's a very real question, very real concern in some organizations. This is, I mentioned what I described as 3 key roles to create a highly functioning quality system. One of those roles is the product manager, who is strategic, values quality, and makes sure that the definition of done includes that and the time is allocated. Another is the lead engineer and quality professionals, who themselves implement and lead the way and set the tone for all of the accountability of all of the team. But the third I'm getting to, it's the leadership, it's the executive team, it's the managers, both in engineering department and outside. Those folks have to recognize when there is a dysfunction, a lack of alignment, maybe some lack of shared accountability across their groups. And I think the case where teams don't want to be transparent with their metrics indicates some dysfunction in the organization, and that really should be something that's noted and acted upon by the senior leadership, because the outcome will be better for everybody if the trust across departments is there.
Okay, great. Well, right now that is all the questions that we have. I'll give the audience a few more minutes to go ahead and submit a question if they have one. Meanwhile, while we're waiting, I do want to remind the audience that today's event is being recorded. So if you missed any or all of the presentation, just know you'll be able to access it on demand. This afternoon, hopefully later on this afternoon today, we'll be sending out an email that will include a link to the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you'll be able to access it there. You just go to the DevOps.com site, click under webinars on demand, and it should be right there waiting for you. And let's see. Okay, so it looks like we do have one more question here. How can organizations maintain software quality during periods of rapid growth in the number and size of the internal teams?
Another interesting question, and I always think when I get asked a question like this is the good problem. So I like that this audience is experiencing the good problem. It is a challenge, and I've felt this challenge, and it's like that pressure cooker egg trying to crack because you have commitments to your customers, and yet you're trying to hire and onboard a team and develop infrastructure that you know will work going forward. My thoughts are this. One is work really, really, really hard to keep that quality culture. It is a fallacy that by going faster now you'll go faster forever. It just isn't the case. So I think continue to be that voice of the customer, that voice of evangelism for quality. That said, it's perfectly fine and appropriate at times to take some technical debt, and that could be in your infrastructure that you're using to support quality, or it could be in the code that you're writing. What I recommend is that you, in a formal way, like I said, there should be a ritual when you make choices that are against your formal definition of done. There can be a ritual when you make choices around you're choosing to take on some technical debt. So I think that you ideally take that choice, document it, and allocate time. And this could be in I'm going to use the word IP sprint, in a set aside time, a 2-week time frame where it's a bug bash or it's a rework period for a team, or you could set aside you could set a team on the side to work it later, but try to keep track of it and try to come back to it, because it's going to increase your overall quality that you recover that technical debt in a reasonable time frame.
Okay, all right, great. Well, we are looking at about 3 minutes to the top of the hour, so that's all the time that we do have for questions today. I do want to thank everybody for submitting questions, and also want to let you folks know that if we did not get to your questions during this Q&A period, as I said earlier, Maria is getting a copy of all of the questions, so I'm sure she or somebody from her organization will be more than happy to contact you offline and help you get the answers you're looking for. Maria Loughlin, thank you very much for giving us such a great presentation. Judging by the number of questions we got in, I know the audience got a lot out of it, and I did too, so thank you very much. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today, and as I was saying earlier, today's webinar has been recorded. It's also on the DevOps.com website. It will be under the on-demand section of the webinar site on DevOps.com. While you're there, take a look at some of the other webinars that we have, both upcoming and on-demand. Hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 or 3 or more that pique your interest. Again, Maria, thank you very much for your time today and for giving us such a great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Let's make this a quality world.
All right, great. Well, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.